I know you don't speak Polish, but you need to trust me. I said just the best things about you.
I'll trust you.
Okay, so this is the pilot. The green goes forward. The red, don't use it.
Seems easy.
Okay, perfect.
I'll give it a try. So I have a good and a bad message for you guys. I'm going to talk about economics. That can be the bad, so the good one is I don't have too much time, which means I'm not going to bore you. As the introduction hopefully gave away, I'm working with a company called the Esports Observer. So together with a team, we manage a B2B platform purely focused on the business of esports. And what we do is we track all kinds of financial streams. We build products around this and help people who are in the industry to better understand it. And we help people to get into the industry if they want to understand, what's happening. And I mean, this is how I grew up. Who plays games? Like, can I get a quick show of hands? And who's involved in the esports industry? Okay, so this is what I used to see back in the days. This is what you probably see today. And what I want to do is I want to quickly take some time to tell you why I think this happened and why I think this is possible, which will then ultimately help you to understand, how the industry ticks and what you can do in order to participate or get in. And I'm gonna do like 4 quick things, which is an engaged community, it's free-to-play monetization, we'll talk about content distribution and availability, and then obviously it's the audience, which started with millennials. You can add Gen Z to that and all the new generations coming up. So basically, if we look at this, there's kind of 6 games right now that we would consider the top tier games. Where there's League of Legends, you have Dota 2, Counter-Strike, PUBG, which has just recently been released as a standalone and final game. We can look at Overwatch, which got some pretty big hype around the League system they're building. And there's Hearthstone. Name it esports or not, but it's one of the top games right now. What's interesting about this is, if you look at this list, like 4.5 of these are community made. Which means there was no person coming up saying, I'm going to build a game for the esports market. But there were pre-existing games, and what happened is, people took them, they modified them, put them back to the community, people loved what they saw, they got engaged, they played the games, and then publishers picked up the games and made them as big as they are today. Right? So if we look at League of Legends and Dota, they're so similar because they have the same kind of parent in that sense. I made it 4.5 because Overwatch, people tend to say it's Team Fortress 2. We can argue about that later, but just to give an indication that this has grown because of a community. This did not start because people wanted it to start. When we look at free-to-play monetization, who knows what the free-to-play model is? Are you familiar with this? Because when game publishers started doing games, what they did is they created a game, they sold the game, you bought it, then they created a new game, you bought it again, and it's always like, let's say $60. So you can see the waves. It's always $60 revenues, peaks, it goes back down again. What happened with free-to-play is that people gave out a game for free. They said, here's a game, you can play it, you can use bits and pieces of it, but if you want more, if you want, I don't know, nicer skins for your characters, if you want to dress them differently, or whatsoever, you can spend money long term. So what is the connection to esports? Esports is a marketing retention tool for companies. If you see leagues, if you see tournaments, if you see all that stuff happening on a day-to-day basis, every weekend, every month, you'll see the game, and people will play the game longer. If you play the game longer, you'll spend more money. And if you look at Riot Games, who only with like vanity items in the game that do nothing but make it look different, make $1 billion, so that shows where this is going and what kind of market this is. Right now, we're seeing a perversion of this, where you buy a game for $60 and then you can still spend a lot of money on it. And just to give you one quick calculation, so this is Overwatch. They just released the Overwatch League, where can buy jerseys for your team. And if you want to get all of them for one team, it's another $100 to $125. If you want to buy all of the league skins, you can spend additional $1,200 to $1,500 for a game that you bought for $60. And this is just for the league, so there's much more money you can spend on this. But then again, the prolonged sales cycle for people playing is what makes esports grow, because the companies understood, hey, if we put up a league, people are going to play, we're going to be rich. The interesting thing about esports and content distribution is you see sports on TV all the time. And so basically there is some disciplines that grow because of media attention and television, and you can see it everywhere. Esports didn't have that. Like back in the days when it started, people communicated through social media, through forums, emails. You followed completely different channels, so it intrinsically grew basically from people who wanted to make it grow. Same with the games. So it's the community made the audience, the community made sure that people are engaged, people understand what's going on. Right now we're seeing a lot of media attention, but that's just happening now, and I'll give you a graph for this in a bit. So don't forget that, again, this is driven by an engaged community. It's always people first. What helped us? I mean, platforms like YouTube and Twitch back then helped us. Twitch got acquired for like $1 billion in cash. If we now look at Facebook and Twitter and you look at all of these platforms getting in to buy media rights, then you can kind of understand where this is going, but that's a different story for another day. This is, and basically Steven mentioned this he briefly touched on this when he talked about the audience. What happened is there is a full ecosystem that developed around millennials or Gen Z, or you can call them whatever you want, like younger people. I'm 35, I consider myself old in the industry. So that's just as a benchmark. If you want to reach them, you basically go to Twitch right now. Which, if you think about it, we're still TV. We just changed the medium. Like, esports is entertainment. What we do is not sports, but it is entertainment. And we have built our own platforms, we built our own agencies. There's so much that developed throughout the years around the ecosystem, and everything people want to do is they want to talk to this young audience. This is one headline from a study that I recently read, which I felt is completely crazy. That's based on the US. But you can tell that 1 in 3 teens would rather be an esports athlete than a regular athlete. We can challenge that, of course, but if you just that this is happening and that some report basically found that out, I think that's crazy if you think about it. And that shows the paradigm shift we're moving into. So I pulled 2 different sources. And I'll tell you why. Because what I looked at is there's Newzoo research and there's Super Data. And what they do is they analyze the market in terms of where does the revenue come from, how big is the industry going to be. What's interesting, if you look at this, is that both of them have the same underlying thesis, that esports is mainly driven by sponsorship, ads, and investments. Or if you look at the right, it's a smaller number, so it's a larger portion of sponsorship and ad. If you take the investments out with Super Data, it's kind of the same numbers, kind of same volume. So let's just, as a thesis, establish that esports is driven by sponsorship money and advertising. So what does it mean? If you look at this, and if anyone wants to take a guess on what that is, I'm going to explain this to you. The green line is esports prize pools, like the money that was distributed across esports tournaments throughout the years. And we start with 98, and we're up until the end of 2017. If you look at the other 2 lines, we have a normalized Dow Jones, and we looked at S&P 500 on a 52 weeks rolling average. And there's some kind of similarities. What we then did is we put the Google trend over this. So, and I made it transparent, so I hope you can properly see this. But Google trend, just as a kind of indication for people getting interested in esports, when did it peak? When did people really pick up esports? And what we did here is, I basically put this into phases. Like, first 10 years is like whatever, there were people playing games, they carried their computers somewhere, who cares, let's just not get involved, it's these kids in the basements. What later happened is, you can see the interest is increasing. Hey, so what is this? Let's put some money in, so there's a little peak on the green line, but then obviously it's pretty bad timing, because something that is called financial crisis happened, and it put us back. What you can see right now, and you can see this in the peak, as well as in the stock indices, as well as in the amount of money that is pulled into esports prize pools, is that now people are like, yeah, let's do esports, let's go. Why is this important to understand? If we assume that 70% almost of the money going into esports is ad revenue and sponsorships, and what we did here is an indicator. We took the tournament prize money. Of course, that's not it, but when do people spend money? People spend money when they have money, when they're well off. So you want to put money into something when you have it, right? So right now there's this super high correlation between the world economy, obviously, and esports, but we don't have a second thing, right? So right now we're all dependent on the money coming in through the companies, and that needs to change at one point. So that's why I think that what's happening right now, is it a bubble? I wouldn't call it bubble, but I think that we need to solidify our revenue streams, and we need to make sure that we take different paths. And that goes into what Steven said, that goes into what Victor said earlier this morning. And this is basically why what Victor does is smart, because if you don't expand, if you don't put your flag everywhere right now, you're going to be gone in no time. And here's a couple of theses that I want to just give you as a kind of thought, and we can happily discuss this afterwards, and you can feel free to ask questions. So first of all, again, this is prize money increase. We can see that this is and we're looking at 19 years compound annual growth rate, and we're looking at 40+%, which is crazy if you think about it. And I call this internal KPIs, because this is data from the esports industry, which is, in this case, not correlated to any other things. It's just really what happened in the industry. This is basically wealth distribution, if you want to call it like this. So how many people earn money playing esports, and how much do they earn? And if you want to analyze a trend, what you can see here is, if you look at 2009, and you go back to today, then you can see that in these kind of 9 years, what happened is 14,000 people earn money with this, like, in addition to the 2,000 they did before. So there's a massive increase on people earning money. And all of these people, on average, earn $5,000 more. So think about this: 14,000 people more. They now earn, 5,000 more each. So that gives you perspective on how much money is being put into the ecosystem. Is it sustainable? Let's see. I guess we'll find out. But that's still a almost 40% growth rate over 19 years, which is pretty solid for an industry KPI. If we now look at the tournaments. This is the amount of tournaments that has been recorded. And this is all based on esports earnings as a platform. So it might not be 100% accurate, but it's a good indicator for trend analysis. So we can see that it's going down in the end. Like, why is that? There's more money coming in, there's more people earning money, but why is there less tournaments? Because they're starting to consolidate. And that's the one trend we'll see in the industry, and that is going to happen to expand like a lot. What we can see is a market consolidation. There's going to be less players in the market. They're going to do bigger things. And this is why what Victor is doing right now with the Performance Center, an ICO integrating different businesses is the way to go, because otherwise you're just going to be swallowed by different companies coming into the market right now. So that's still, even with the consolidation already, that's still 37.5% over 19 years. So I want to show you this again. Why is this important? Because I think that this is the future. If you look at the current development, there will be mega events, there will be large events, and they're going to play a major role in marketing to the audience. People are not used to paying money for games anymore. We live in a free generation. Like, people want to get stuff immediately. They want to get it for free. They want everything on demand. It's like you can get everything you want whenever you want it, for kind of low prices, at least that's the expectations, because it's online. Why would I spend money on it? So that's why these people still pay money, and they pay like 40 to 80 euros for this event to go with their friends. So if you want to get them engaged, if you want to advertise to them, you go there, you get them right there. You go to these platforms, you go to the tournaments. If you want to invest in esports, that's really cool, and all the stats I showed you are nice, but it's the same as saying you want to invest in sports. Like, what do you want to do? You want to do a North American MLB? You want to do Polish soccer? Like, there's so many differences in audience, in disciplines. And this is just, I put this in to make sure that even though it looks nice, don't generalize stuff. Go into the detail, figure out what you want to get out, and then figure out who you want to speak to and where you can find these people. And I'm pretty sure that Andreas, with a German focus initially, he can talk about how that developed. And that's very valuable, because you need to understand what you're getting into. And if you call it esports, or if people talk about esports, make sure to ask, what exactly do you mean? Like, which part of esports? And that's one thing that I'll tell you right away. Esports teams are media companies. And the problem is, not all of them know. There are still teams that think they need to compete and they need to be the best in tournaments, which is true to a certain point. But they didn't understand that all they're selling is content. You're content companies. You're marketing your content. You're building a brand. You're building characters. So that's why it's important that people understand this. And we've seen a trend right now for franchise leagues with Overwatch League, with North American League of Legends, the franchises, where people spend 10 to 20 million to get a slot, and that now will allow them to not be relegated. So now they can focus on what they do best. I mean, would you consider NBA teams as sports teams? Or if you look around their ecosystem, like what are they? They're a lot into media production nowadays. And then, of course, the next trend's going to happen is market consolidation. I'm not talking about the Nielsen's coming in. I'm not talking about Lagardère Sports being everywhere. I'm not talking about all the major companies coming in, going in on a global scale and just, taking market share. But what I'm calling here is that there's going to be a lot of elimination in the market. So the next couple of years, larger companies are either going to hire people or they're just going to push them out of the market. And so I think right now what we see a massive entry of large corporations. We're talking multi-billion dollars revenue, like a lot of money going around. They're getting in, they're trying to understand. And that's where we are right now, right? So we're right now in this knowledge transfer window where people like Steven, they come in, he said it like, I'm going to test, I'm going to look at the US market for this, I'm going to look at the European market for that, and then he's going to combine it and he's going to build something bigger. So does that ultimately mean that these people that he learns from are going to still exist, hopefully, because he acquires them or there's an acqui-hire? But worst case scenario is he just builds something and he pushes out all the endemic companies because they're not ready for this. And I'd say we're right here. So people need to brace themselves to get an understanding of what's happening in the market. The last thing I want to show you, just to spark that thought, let's look at franchise leagues, right? Here's a nice overlap of NALCS teams and Overwatch League teams. So you can see that there's 4 teams, or like 2 teams, they have a team in each league, which is interesting. And this is going to be hard to read, but if you look at that, you can say, okay, look, here's the NALCS team. We look at the major investments, which might be companies you might know from a different background. But if you could look at the next column with the associated pro teams, that means either it's the teams that invested, or it is like one of the guys that invested, or it is one of the common investors that invested. But if you look at this, like out of these teams, almost all of them have a sports team in the background. So this is sports. We're not talking esports. We're talking actually sports in a different form of entertainment. And funnily enough, if you do the same thing for Overwatch League, same picture. Like you look at the massive sponsors coming in, and you look at the sports teams behind them. So what we're looking at is, we're already looking at a consolidation. Like sports teams are taking over esports teams. They work with them, or they acquire them, or they have a common investor, as an initial stage. But what's ultimately going to happen is we'll see a massive consolidation. And we can see that from the influx of money coming into the industry. And so that's just to kind of spark some thoughts on where esports is going. And that will be it.
You said always people first. That's similar to what we heard before when we had the presentation about the casino and everything was amazing, but we got it in esports. And that probably refers to the fact that right now we are going through a hiring boom in esports. So my question is, do we have enough people with relevant skills and experience?
Yes and no. So I'd say, So the business we run, and I mean, this is not going to be recorded, so let's face it. With the business I run, we had trouble. Right now we're pretty good staffed, but we had trouble finding people that actually understand business, who can read a balance sheet, and can then basically put that into a trend for esports. That's very difficult. So we do need more people coming in that are trained and skilled, also for all the different kind of areas, right? But then on the other hand, look at Nielsen and the market reports. Nielsen is currently working on metrics that they use for sports and TV, and they're going to bring them into esports. So if I'm a large corporation, where am I going to buy my stuff? Am I going to buy it from a trusted source like Nielsen, where I get the Nielsen stamp? I spent like a ridiculous amount of money, which is worth it or not. I can't judge that. But am I going to buy it from them, or am I going to buy it from somebody who is in esports, even though they have their established businesses? So there is a lot of knowledge coming in that esports needs to absorb as well. So I definitely think there is enough room for more specialized resources in that sense.
Okay, so who is to take care of talent development? It's esports teams' job, or leagues, or who could do it?
Talent in the sense of players, or
no, talent development in the sense of journalists you are hiring for the or event managers.
We need to do this. I mean, it's easy to just grab people somewhere and put them into a new setting, and that works. And we've seen this before. But so I worked at Fnatic, and the first question I asked is when I came in is like, what's the life cycle of a player? And what do we do as a team after the players left? And there is, there's some plans, there's no real plans. So typically people, can go back to university or they follow through with other educational programs. But I definitely think it's on us to make sure that we develop the resources we have and we get them to a point where we want them to have, because we want to avoid, having other companies come in and immediately take all of the market share from us. We need to make sure that we understand the language that these companies are speaking, right? I need to understand that I can discuss with Steven on an eye-to-eye level on what he's going to do, like what is his investment strategy, how does it work? Because it might affect me. Maybe he's planning a competitor, or maybe there's just so much stuff going on that we need to establish a program, whatever you want to call this, to make sure that we develop. It's just every other company. It's the same thing. Okay.
You mentioned your experience working with Fnatic, which gives you probably the very unique perspective on the market situation. So the growing number of teams, how does it impact the situation of already established teams? Is it more difficult to get money from the market for teams?
Okay, I need to be careful. I'm going to make a call and say there's a couple of teams that will survive and a lot of teams are going to die. Because most teams are not staffed properly when it comes to the business backgrounds. A lot of teams do not have the backing and they don't understand what backing they need in order to exist for like 10 years, 20 years. We're talking long term. And I think that what's happening right now is like everyone's building a team. Like I have an esports team, right? So there's going to be a few. Look at the major leagues. Like if we take Counter-Strike, for example. You look at ECS, you look at EPL, you look at E-League. It's all the same teams. It's the same pro teams competing over and over. So I would say there's a big gap in relevancy, right? So there's some that are highly relevant, and then there's others that nobody really cares. Is there room for both? Yes. Are they gonna build the next billion-dollar franchise? Probably not.
Okay, so we could say that in terms of teams, there are also the consolidation happening, that we will have less teams, but stronger.
Well, I think we'll always have a lot of teams, but we'll have a few that are relevant, and that will remain this way. I don't think that you'll have 5,000 or 200 teams that are highly relevant. I mean, it's the same with, look at every other sport. Like look at the leagues, look at the German Bundesliga for football, look at the NFL, look at the NBA. It's all, of course, there's a lot of basketball teams, but which teams do you really care about? Unless you're into grassroots or unless that's your thing, right? You know the top teams and that's it. Okay.
When talking Polish, I compared the Sport Observer to, for example, Financial Times. And it's already 2 years since the inception of TEO. What's the most surprising thing in your success? I'm not asking if you expected this because you had to, but what's surprising?
What surprised me is the same thing that surprises me wherever I look at it. Like we recently closed an investment round with American City Business Journals, who own Sports Business Journal in the US, and Leaders in London, which is like massive household names in sports. And that we're now working with them on developing our product offerings further. That's something that's my best case scenario. I'm really happy about this, but that also shows the interest, from the outside world going into esports. And I mean, I'm happy that we have a market. So I like the comparison to Wall Street Journal. And if you look at this, it's very niche. And we can see like an increase in traffic. We can see an increase in interest, like people reaching out, people trying to understand stuff. We've now started to build like reports so we can easier share knowledge. Instead of having on one-to-one conversations, we can now push papers out and these kind of things. So I'm surprised by the let's say the speed of the growth that we see ourselves as well and that we see in the industry.
I've mentioned talent development, hiring people. How difficult is it to hire a journalist for TEO?
Very.
Very.
It's very difficult because you need people that understand. Again, you need the business world, you need the esports world, and you need somebody who can connect the dots. But I mean, ultimately, esports is an industry. It has some triggers, things behave a certain way. You can look at any industry and you can figure out what drives the industry, right? So people need just to be able to understand how the business works, who the main players are, and what's going to happen, and that will allow you to forecast trends. And that's what we see with investments right now. We used to see like $100,000 investments, and then there was a $7 million investment. Now we're talking 20, 25 million per team. So we can see that increase, and that allows you to, if you analyze the financial streams within the industry and into the industry, that's what allows you to make sense of what's happening. But you obviously need someone who understands the industry players, and the financial models behind it and the business plan, so they understand like what's going to happen.
Okay, probably if it would be easy, you wouldn't be the boss and the owner of the EO, so still, it's not that bad. Okay, and the very last question, you mentioned the investment trends right now, and from your perspective, from a perspective of a person who keeps analyzing the trends, what's coming now? What's the most important trend of all this you mentioned during your presentation?
Well, if I tell you, you don't follow me.
Maybe, but it's a close meeting, just for friends.
No, what we've seen is, of course, we've seen this influx in capital for teams, but that's mainly because of Overwatch League and all the franchises going up. I think what's going to happen next really depends on how the teams capitalize on it. If teams understand that they're media companies, and if they get that they need to promote content, and you have some that are very good at this, then of course we'll see more sponsorships, right? And it's a no-brainer. There's going to be more investments, more sponsorships. I think that there is going to be a push into local infrastructure, and specifically in Europe, and Steven touched that as well. If you look at the US, and I'm a brand in the US, and I say, give me whatever, 5 million a year, and I'll do your US marketing. That works. If you're in Europe, and I don't know, if you're in Germany, and you say, give me 5 million of your budget, brands are going to say no, because they have a budget for Spain, they have one for Germany, they have one for Poland, they have one for each country. So you don't have consolidated marketing budgets yet. So I think what we're going to see is an influx of capital into regionalized, probably leagues, probably more teams. They're not going to be as big, but they're going to make sure that as a local company, you have a channel, if you want to get into esports, that you can use to reach your audience.
Perfect. We got the red alert telling us time's up. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.